I told you, he said. The same hands that gather wealth can also scatter it. Have you ever thought about this? Why do some people rise from nothing and become great, while others fall from greatness to nothing? Have you ever seen a man who was so poor that even beggars felt sorry for him, but one day, he became so rich that kings and rulers sought his advice? And have you ever seen a rich man who lost everything so quickly that even the poorest people began to pity him? This is the story of Ojo, a man who knew both the deepest poverty and the highest wealth, but within 2 years, he lost everything again. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Ojo was a man who had nothing. Not just that he was poor, he was the poorest man in the whole town of Iloturu. He lived in a tiny, broken-down hut that leaked whenever it rained. His clothes were old and torn. His shoes had holes in them, so he often walked barefoot. Ojo had no wife, no children, and no family willing to help him. Even his friends had abandoned him. People whispered whenever they saw him. Is this how a man should live? Ojo is cursed. Maybe his ancestors offended the gods. Even the dogs in this town eat better than him. And truly, life was hard for Ojo. Sometimes, he went for 3 days without food. When he had no choice, he would beg for food in the marketplace. But one day, something strange happened. One evening, as Ojo sat under a tree, his stomach empty and his heart heavy, an old man walked up to him. This was no ordinary old man. His eyes were sharp like an eagle's, and his voice was deep like thunder. "Young man," the old man said, "why do you look so miserable?" Ojo sighed. "I am tired of this life. I have nothing, and nobody cares about me." The old man smiled. "What if I told you that by this time next year, you will be the richest man in this land?" Ojo laughed bitterly. "That is impossible. A man like me? Rich? Even if I worked for 100 years, I could never be rich." But the old man shook his head. "Listen to me, Ojo. There are many paths to wealth. Some are slow, some are fast. Some are clean, some are dirty. But one thing is sure, if you follow the right path, you will never be poor again." Ojo looked at the man carefully. "And what is the right path?" The old man smiled again. "You will find out soon. But when the opportunity comes, remember, the same hands that gather wealth can also scatter it." Before Ojo could ask any more questions, the old man turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. And that night, Ojo's life changed forever. That night, Ojo could not sleep. The old man's words kept ringing in his ears. The same hands that gather wealth can also scatter it. What did he mean by that? Ojo wondered. But before he could think too much, sleep overtook him, and he had a dream. In the dream, Ojo saw Tade, his childhood friend. Tade and Ojo had grown up together, running through the dusty streets of Iloturu, playing in the rain, and stealing mangoes from the village chief's farm. But as they grew older, life had separated them. Ojo became the poorest man in the land, while Tade disappeared from the town. No one knew where he went or what had happened to him. But now, in this dream, Tade stood before him, smiling. "Ojo, my friend," Tade said, "wake up. Your time has come." "My time? Time for what?" Ojo asked. Tade laughed. "You will see. Tomorrow, go to the old marketplace at noon. Stand near the big Irako tree. A man will come to you. Follow him, and your life will never be the same again." Before Ojo could ask any more questions, the dream ended. The next day, Ojo woke up with a strange excitement in his heart. Could this be real, he asked himself? But he had nothing to lose. He had spent years waiting for a miracle, why not try this? So, at exactly noon, he walked to the old marketplace. The place was almost empty, except for a few traders. He stood near the big Irako tree, just as Tade had said. Please subscribe. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Maybe it was just a foolish dream, Ojo thought sadly. But just as he turned to leave, a black horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of him. The door opened, and Tade stepped out. Ojo's mouth fell open. Tade. Is this really you? He shouted. Tade laughed and hugged him. Yes, my friend. I have returned. Come with me. We have much to discuss. Ojo hesitated. Where are we going? Tade smiled. To your new life. Inside the carriage, Ojo couldn't stop staring at his friend. Tade was no longer the poor village boy he once knew. He now wore fine clothes, a gold wristwatch, and polished leather shoes. Tade, tell me the truth. What happened to you? How did you become rich? Ojo asked. Tade leaned back and sighed. I found something rare, something most people ignore. A business that people overlook because they do not know its value. Ojo's eyes widened. Tell me. What is it? Tade smiled. I sell white sand to glassmakers and jewelers. Ojo frowned. White sand? The same sand that covers our riverbanks? Who would buy that? Tade nodded. That is the secret, my friend. What people see as worthless can be turned into great wealth if you know its value. He explained that high-quality white sand was in high demand in the city, used for making fine glass, jewelry, and even expensive tiles. Many people did not know this, so only a few businessmen controlled the supply. I will show you how to find the best sand, how to sell it, and who to sell it to. In 6 months, you will no longer be the poorest man in Iloturu. Ojo could hardly believe what he was hearing. Could something so simple truly change his life? But he had nothing to lose. So, he agreed. And that day, his journey to riches began. From that day, Ojo's life began to change. Tade took him to a hidden riverbank outside the town, where the whitest, purest sand could be found. Look around you, Ojo, Tade said. What do you see? Ojo frowned. Just sand. Plenty of it. Tade smiled. Exactly. This is your gold mine. People walk past it every day, but only the wise know its value. Then he showed Ojo how to wash the sand, package it in sacks, and sell it to glassmakers and tile factories in the big city. At first, Ojo was skeptical. Who will buy sand? He asked. But when they arrived at the city and Tade introduced him to buyers, Ojo was shocked. For the first time in his life, someone paid him money, real money, for something he had collected for free. That day, Ojo sold 10 sacks of white sand and made more money than he had ever seen in his entire life. His heart pounded. This is real. This is really happening. Ojo worked harder than ever before. Every day, he woke up early, went to the riverbank, filled his sacks with the best white sand, and took them to the city. The demand was huge, and Ojo was smart. Instead of just selling to one buyer, he found many. Instead of using his hands, he hired workers. Instead of carrying sacks on his back, he bought carts and later, trucks. Within 6 months, Ojo was no longer the poorest man in Iloturu. Within 1 year, he was the richest. People who once mocked him now greeted him with respect. The market women who once chased him away when he begged for food now ran to sell him the best meats and fruits. Even the village chief invited him to meetings. And the greatest shock? The same people who once said he was cursed, now said he was blessed. Ojo built the biggest house in the village, with shiny glass windows made from the very sand that made him rich. He dressed in fine clothes, ate the best meals, and traveled to the city like a king. At night, he sat on his grand balcony, looking at the stars and smiling. I will never be poor again, he said to himself. But Ojo had forgotten something. The old man's warning. The same hands that gather wealth can also scatter it. And soon, his fall began. Ojo had everything a man could ever want: wealth, power, and respect. But something was missing. At first, he worked hard, saving and reinvesting his money. But as the riches piled up, he changed. Ojo forgot his days of suffering. He stopped waking up early. He stopped thinking about the future. He only wanted to enjoy life, and he wanted to do it in the biggest way possible. Ojo started drinking not just palm wine but the most expensive foreign alcohol that only the richest men in the city could afford. He started smoking, filling the air with the thick smell of burning tobacco and herbs that made him feel like he was on top of the world. And women? Ojo did not marry just one. He gathered many women, loose women who had no shame, women who only cared about his money. At first, he married 2. Then 4. Then 6. Before long, he lost count of how many women lived in his house. Some came as wives. Others came as concubines. But none of them loved him, they only loved his gold, silver, and expensive clothes. And Ojo, lost in pleasure, did not care. Please subscribe. Ojo hated to be alone. He surrounded himself with vain men who had no wisdom, no direction, no sense. These men praised him endlessly. Ojo the Great. Ojo the Mighty, they shouted. Ojo, the richest man in the land. No one is greater than you. And he believed them. Whenever they told him, you must celebrate your greatness, he would throw a grand party. Musicians would gather, singing songs that praised his name. Drums would sound all night, and the town would shake with laughter and noise. And money flowed like water. Ojo threw parties for no reason. He once killed 10 cows just because one of his friends sneezed and they said it was a sign of long life. Another time, he sprayed money on dancers until the ground was covered in gold coins. But the more he spent, the less satisfied he became. So, he began to travel. Ojo started traveling aimlessly. One day, he was in Lagos. The next, he was in Ghana. The next, he was in Dubai. He had no purpose, no business to do, just spending money. He bought golden shoes in Italy. He hired musicians from America just to sing for him in his bedroom. He paid millions just to sit on a royal chair in another country for 5 minutes. While other rich men invested in businesses, Ojo invested in useless pleasures. And his wives were even worse. They competed to outspend each other, buying diamonds, pearls, silk dresses, and perfumes made from the rarest flowers. One of his wives, Adizwa, once burned all her clothes because she wanted fresh fashion. Another wife, Ronk, ordered her maids to wash her feet with milk every morning. Their greed knew no bounds, and Ojo did not stop them. After all, his money was endless, right? One day, an old friend came to visit Ojo. It was Tade, the same friend who had introduced him to the white sand business. But now, Tade looked worried. Ojo, my friend, I see that you are enjoying life, but have you saved anything for tomorrow? He asked. Ojo laughed. Tomorrow? My friend, I am the richest man in the land. My money can never finish. Tade shook his head. Wealth is like a river. If you do not direct it, it will flow away. Be careful, Ojo. Do not waste what you have worked for. But Ojo ignored him. Tade, you worry too much. Come, drink with me. Dance with me. Let us enjoy life. Tade sighed. I have warned you. I only hope you will remember my words when the river dries up. Then he left. And Ojo never saw him again. Ojo continued his reckless life. But something was happening. His business was failing. He stopped going to the riverbank, so his workers became lazy. Other businessmen took over the white sand business, and Ojo did not notice. His money was running out, but because he spent it so carelessly, he did not realize it. Until one day, something terrible happened. Ojo woke up, stretched, and called his servants. Bring me my golden robe, he ordered. Silence. Bring me my food. Silence. Where is everyone? He rushed downstairs. His house was empty. His servants were gone. His wives had disappeared. And when he rushed to his treasure room, his money was gone too. Ojo fell to the ground, his hands trembling. What is happening? And then, he finally remembered the old man's warning. The same hands that gather wealth can also scatter it. Ojo's hands had scattered everything. And now, he was poorer than he had ever been. Ojo sat in the middle of his empty house, staring at the walls that once echoed with music and laughter. The great Ojo, who once ruled Ilotura with his wealth, was now a broken man. His wives had abandoned him. His friends had disappeared. His servants had vanished like smoke. And his money was gone. The town whispered behind his back. "Did you hear? Ojo the mighty is now Ojo the beggar. He used to throw money in the air, now he is looking for coins on the ground." The very people who had praised him when he was rich now mocked him in his downfall. Ojo's heart burned with shame. "No! I refuse to be poor again," he screamed. And that was when he made his worst mistake. Ojo had no money, but he had pride. He could not bear the shame of being poor again. So, instead of humbly rebuilding his life, he decided to fake his wealth just for a little while, just until he could rise again. He went to Baba Owo, the richest and most feared moneylender in the land. Baba Owo was a man no one dared to cross. He loaned money only to those who could pay back. And those who failed? No one knew exactly what happened to them, but they were never seen again. Ojo entered Baba Owo's grand house, his heart pounding. The old man sat behind a golden table, chewing on a kola nut. "Ojo," he said, staring at him, "I never thought I would see you in my house. Please subscribe." Ojo swallowed hard. "Baba, I need a loan. Just a little money to restart my business." Baba Owo smiled a slow, knowing smile. "How much do you need?" 10,000 gold coins, Ojo said. "I will pay back in 1 year." Baba Owo laughed. 1 year? Ojo, you and I both know you have nothing left. My business will rise again." Ojo insisted. "I just need time." Baba Owo leaned forward. "Very well. But if you fail to pay in 1 year, you will give me something else." Ojo hesitated. "What do you want?" Baba Owo's smile widened. "Your house, and everything you own." Ojo's heart skipped a beat. But this house is the only thing I have left." "Then make sure you pay back," Baba Owo said. "Do we have a deal?" Ojo thought about it. He had no choice. Deal. And so, with a single signature, Ojo placed his last possession on the line, all because of his foolish pride. With the loan, Ojo returned to the town in grand style. He hired musicians. He threw a lavish party. He wore fine clothes and walked with pride. And the people believed the lie. "Ah! Ojo is back. We thought he was finished, but look at him now." The same fake friends who had abandoned him returned. His wives, who had run away, came back, smiling sweetly as if they had never left. "We knew you would rise again, my darling," they said. And Ojo welcomed them all back, not because he loved them, but because he wanted to prove he was still great. But the truth was simple. He was living on borrowed time. Ojo poured the loan into his business, hoping to restart his sand trade. But the world had moved on. Other traders had taken over the market. His old customers had new suppliers. The business that once made him rich no longer needed him. The money vanished faster than before. And soon, the year was up. Ojo sat in his empty house, sweating. The deadline had come. He had no money. No business. No backup plan. And worst of all, Baba Owo was coming. At exactly midnight, a knock echoed at the door. Ojo opened it with shaking hands. Baba Owo stood there, his cold eyes staring into Ojo's soul. "Your time is up," he said. Ojo fell to his knees. "Baba, please. Just give me more time." Baba Owo's face did not change. "Time? You had 1 year, Ojo. The deal is the deal. Your house now belongs to me." Ojo turned, looking at the grand house he had built with his own hands. The house that once held parties, feasts, and laughter. The house where he had lived like a king. Now, it was being taken away from him. His wives and friends, seeing that Ojo was finished, ran away once again, this time, for good. Servants threw his few remaining belongings into the street. And that night, under the cold moon, Ojo, the once richest man in Iloturu, became homeless. Ojo is now a broken man, sleeping in the streets where he once threw money. The town laughs at him. The same people who once called him Ojo the Great now call him Ojo the Fool. But is this the end of Ojo's story? Or will one last chance appear for him to change his life forever? Ojo sat in the market square, hungry, dirty, and forgotten. His fine clothes were gone. His golden shoes had turned to dust. The same people who once praised him now stepped over him like a useless rag. "Who is that beggar?" a young boy asked. "That is Ojo," his mother whispered. "The man who had it all, and lost everything." Ojo closed his eyes in shame. How had he fallen so low? And then, a familiar voice spoke. "Ojo, we meet again." Ojo's eyes flew open. There, standing before him, was the old man from the riverbank, the same man who had warned him long ago. The crowd fell silent. The old man looked down at Ojo with sadness in his eyes. "I told you," he said. "The same hands that gather wealth can also scatter it." Ojo's throat tightened. I was foolish," he whispered. "I thought wealth would last forever." The old man nodded. "Wealth is like a bird, Ojo. If you do not cage it with wisdom, it will fly away." The people in the market stopped to listen. The old man raised his voice, turning to the crowd. "Let Ojo's story be a warning to you all," he declared. "No matter how rich you are today, if you do not manage your wealth wisely, it will disappear. Do not spend without thinking. Do not surround yourself with vain friends who only love your money. Do not waste your life on empty pleasures. Work hard, invest wisely, and always remember, what you do with wealth determines if it will stay or fly away." The people nodded in agreement, whispering among themselves. And with that, the old man turned and walked away, leaving Ojo to face the truth of his mistakes. Ojo's story is a lesson to everyone. Wealth is a blessing, but if handled foolishly, it can lead to disaster. Let us all be wise in managing what we have, so that we do not end up like Ojo. If you have learned something from this story, like this video, share it with your friends and family, and leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another powerful lesson from us. Until next time, stay wise, stay strong, and build a future that will last. Please subscribe.